Great. Okay. Welcome, Lynn. Okay, so welcome everybody to day 6, the final day of the board meeting. It's been a bit of a marathon, but I think everyone's kept up very well, and I think we've had a productive meeting. In terms of the session today, the first session is wrapping up the various pieces from the approvals earlier on in the meeting. So moving into that first session, we've got 3 items where we were looking for additional input from members in terms of the proposed revision to the description of resources in the conceptual framework. We've had positive confirmations from 16 of the 17 board members present for that, so that will go into the exposure draft when that comes out. The ED is subject to the standard editorial process, and then we look forward to seeing that published in the new year. So then the second item that we had was just some final changes in terms of basis for conclusions to the new leases standard, IPSASB 43. Again, we're looking for any sort of problems in principle that members have. Drafting comments can go to staff offline. João, I think you were just going to put up a slide just to remind us of the key areas of change, and we can just take any comments of principle that members want to make on that.
Yes, Ian, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. So I'm going to pull up my slide just to help us guide. Last week, the board made 5 instructions to the best that we could capture in terms of the VCs, and I'm going to put forward those 5 one by one, and to get the board's confirmation if we've captured it well, or if it needs any amendments in terms of its principles. So as Ian said, any editorial suggestions, we'll be taking those offline during the editorial review process, so staff is more than happy to consider those. So the first one was related to explain the reasons for the retention of IPSASB 13 fair value definition in IPSASB 43. So we are now talking about BC 68, just to help guide the board into that item that it was distributed last Friday. So this is the first one, just to get the confirmation from the board, Ian. And now I'm going to stop sharing the screen.
Okay, thanks, João. Any concerns from members on that? Okay, that's good, thank you. I think we're fine on that. So if you move us on to the next one, João.
Yeah, thanks for the confirmation. So the second one was another suggestion from the board also to remove the examples that were in brackets in paragraph BC 80. So that is also in the document marked up. So just to get the confirmation that staff did that correctly. Thank you.
Thanks, João. Again, check whether there are any concerns from members on the change. No, I think we're fine on that.
Okay, thanks for the confirmation again. The third is just a cross-reference that it was not updated, so it was cross-referencing to the wrong paragraph. staff corrected that. So not much more than that, but
okay,
just for the board to know that.
Just walk us through to the next one, Joe.
Yeah.
I don't think you need to.
Yeah, the last two are more substantive because it was the result of the IPSASB's discussion, and staff appreciates the several editorial suggestions that I've already received offline, and I'm more than happy to receive more as I've been asked to distribute the Word version of the papers, but some of the editorials are competing, so staff will address those editorials during the editorial review process. What I'm asking the board in these two, the D and the E, is if we captured the idea, and if the idea is going into the right direction, or if there is anything that staff didn't capture that should also be included. So, and we are talking about the explicit reference to the IFRS 15, so including the number, and that is in BC 98 and BC 99 with the reasons. So I'm going to stop sharing to ask the board confirmation if it is going in the right direction, these two BCs.
Okay, thanks, Joe. I think I might take comments on E as well here.
Okay.
It all sits together. Any points board members want to raise on those changes to the BC there? Mike.
Thanks, Chair. I just had a question on BC 101, but am I ahead of myself?
No, that's fine. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, okay. So, and it may be editorial, it may not be, but I just had a question on BC 101 paragraph C, where we say in the second line, IPSASB's work program, which will have consequential amendments. I wonder whether that shouldn't be may or are likely to.
Okay.
Joe, back on that.
Yeah, that's fine. We don't need to be categorical because once again, we don't know what will be the outcome, and may allows the board that room. Thanks for that, Mike.
Okay, thanks, Mike. And I saw Lynn nodding on that as task force chair. So thanks, Lynn, for that confirmation. Anything else anybody wants to raise? Okay, no, thank you, Joao. I think members are content with all those changes to BCs proposed as a result of our discussions. So thank you for that. Thank you to everyone who's already passed comments through to Joao, and we look forward to that going through the editorial process and to the publication of the new standard. Once again, congratulations to you in particular, but also to everyone who's been involved through task forces and so on, and has also submitted comments along the way. It was quite a journey along the way, but I think that's given us a good basis then to work through those final areas. So thanks very much, everyone, on that. Okay, good. So that moves us then into the third area, which is retirement benefit plans. And obviously, we've had the updated ED circulated, and thanks to Joe and to David for the work that went into that. Now, in terms of the session today, we've had a number of editorial comments from members through following the circulation of that revised draft. Broadly, there's sort of three areas that the task force want to bring back for discussion, sort of three areas of principle, if you like. Essentially, in terms of the way that we move forward with this in due process terms, I think we have three options as a board. We could move to approval today. We could, at the other end of the spectrum, defer approval until the February check-in. Or I think there's a middle way through this, which is the approach that we took in terms of measurement, the measurement EDs last year, where we approved subject to resolution of specific issues, and then those staff worked on those issues. Those were brought back for clearance at the February check-in, and with the option that if anything substantive arose as a result of that final review process, that could be brought back in February, and that would have necessitated a revote at that stage. I think, probably the best approach will be to allow staff to walk the board through the substantive issues that have arisen as a result of members' review, and we'll have the discussion and hopefully get to agreement on whether the proposals brought back, we're content with those, or they need further work. And then I propose that we just decide as a board where we're at in terms of the way forward, and whether we feel comfortable to vote either full approval or approval subject to. But I'd suggest that we come back to that once we've actually had the discussion on the substantive issues. And again, just to stress that we're looking at the authoritative text and basis for conclusions. We know there are some issues that need working through in terms of the illustrative examples. David, as Task Force Chair, anything else you want to add before we move into the discussion of the issues?
I don't think so. Thank you, Ian. I mean, you've stressed the point that we're looking at the authoritative text and reminded board members that staff will be looking more at the illustrative examples. I think the only thing I would add there is that if any board member, technical advisor or observer has got any public sector pension scheme or retirement benefit plan accounts that have got useful information in them that we could see as we work through the IEs, that would be extremely helpful. We've had one or two, some more useful than others, but that would be good. I'd also like to thank those members who have submitted some editorials. Picking up on Giles' point, some of them are opposing each other. So as part of the final process, we will take a view and make sure that we've got the right wording. One or two members have also suggested moving some of the paragraphs to improve the flow. But as usual, some members' idea of what the flow is differs from other members' idea of what the flow is. So again, we will take a view as between staff and Task Force Chair. But on that note, thank you very much. I'll hand back to you.
Thanks, David. So I think probably at this stage, Joe, hand over to you to take us through the areas that where we need further discussion today.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So I don't have a slide for the 30 instructions that we acted upon in the ED. I've had comments back on those, and I think most board members were pretty comfortable with those. But I have some new additional text which has been proposed. So I will just share this slide. So it's been proposed that we include these two new paragraphs following AG 15. So AG 16 provides more information about the calculation of the actuarial present value of promised retirement benefits. So it's just talks about what sort of assumptions that would need to be taken into account. Just gives a little bit more flavour to what is necessary. And the second paragraph, AG 17, sort of describes more in detail a defined contribution plan and what the obligations are. And in some plans, there may be an amount withheld for specific reasons, obviously depending on the the design of the plan. I mean, that's the issue with this project. There are so many different plans out there, so many different things we have to consider. So this is just some extra application guidance to just give a bit more flavour to what's required in a defined benefit and defined contribution plans. So I'll just leave that there for a few moments so board members can read it.
Yeah, thanks, Jo. I was going to ask if you could do that just so that board members could have a read and see what's being proposed. Okay.
Okay.
So if you can stop sharing your screen at this point in time. Adrienne, you were quick on the draw there. So if you want to come in first.
So I just want to say I'm happy with AG 16 because it captures exactly my point, the point that I made the last time, and I think it's precise. My remaining issue is that in the definitions, so I'm not sure that AG 16 now is consistent with a definition of defined benefit plans that are all retirement benefit plans other than defined contribution plans. And I had hoped that there would be kind of more explicit editing at the definition stage to say only for the purposes of this standard. Now, I know that this is an editorial point because it's in the heading of paragraph 10. But when you read defined benefit plans or retirement benefit plans other than defined contribution plans, I think that's inconsistent with the very nice AG 16. And I think the way of handling that would be to finesse the definition to say somehow for the purpose of this standard only, when we refer to defined benefit plans, we're referring to everything other than defined contribution plans. And that would be fine. Thank you. Okay, thanks, Adrienne. So what I'm going to do is I'll take comments from other members and Lynn and Renee in that order, and then go back to staff for comment on the interventions. So Lynn, over to you now.
So mine might be editorial type, but it was just the last sentence of AG 16 when it popped up on the screen just felt very definitive in terms of an either or, and I wondered if it ought to be softened because there could be hybrid situations. So I think we need to look at the wording of the last sentence of AG 16.
Thanks for that, Lynn. Renee, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I read it very quickly. I'm not sure I saw the reference to, for the measurement sentence, the need to use future salary increases as part of the assumptions. There are different valuation requirements for obligations, and some of them will not be using that particular assumption. So I think we just have to be consistent. I don't think I saw that in the drafting. I'm not sure. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So maybe what we'll do is I'll just go back to staff on those three interventions, and then I'll go over to Lindy and to Mike. Jo, if you want to pick up on those points. So Adrienne's point about whether the definitions need to be made specific, and then the points that Lynn and Renee made.
Yeah, so on Adrienne's point, we can definitely change the lead-in sentence to all the definitions to make that stronger and say for the purposes of this standard, these are the following defined terms, rather than just have it for one definition. I mean, I know it is there sort of, but it's not quite as strong as that. So we could actually strengthen that if that would help.
Sorry, before you go on to the next one, David, did you want to come in on that point? Just
Yeah, please. We've put in AG 12 under definitions, we've actually put for the purposes of this draft standard.
Yeah, I think actually Adrienne's point was actually in the definitions section. So I think that's something where perhaps Ross, you can help us as well from a consistency point of view, how we, we address Adrienne's point, because I can see that challenge that, of making sure it's clear that it's in the context of either a DB or a DC scheme. Okay, so if we take that as an instruction to staff that needs to be addressed, and that would be one of our subject twos if we go down that route.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you can just respond then, Joe, to Lynn's point and Renee's point.
Yeah, I'm just trying to, this last sentence, Lynn, I'm not absolutely certain why you thought it was too definitive. So I'm just trying to read it again now.
Yeah, I can think of schemes that have got sharing arrangements between sponsoring sponsors and government departments, whereas you're saying this is neither or. And okay. I can think of arrangements where I know that it's both.
Okay, so we just need to expand that to take that into account.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that, Lynn. And then Renee's point about valuations, whether that including future salary increases.
Yeah, I don't actually have the specific reference, but I'm sure that we do have it in there somewhere, and I will check that. And if we don't have that in another AG, we can definitely add that into that AG there.
Okay, thanks for that. So I'll carry on round in terms of comments to Lindy and then to Mike.
Thank you very much. It's on AG 16 and also the last sentence, and I read it quickly. And it spoke about the relationship with the sponsor. And I thought perhaps it would be better to say it depends on the rules of the scheme or legislation that will determine if there's any funding shortfall, who steps in for that. So I think possibly rather put it in from that legal point of view. I think making good, I think we understand it, but that's not really standard setting talk. So maybe we just have to think of a better way of saying, funding the shortfall or something like that. I know there's specific terms that they do use, that they call it that, but yeah, I think we just have to check that wording. I think, and I think this is also very minor, and I was wondering if we need to mention an actuary also in that paragraph. In AG 13, we say they usually do need the advice of an actuary, but I was wondering if we should say that the actuary calculates it in this way, and I think we should maybe just leave it out and say it's calculated this way. I think sometimes if you put it in, then there's an expectation that an external consultant must be hired, and probably it does in these arrangements, but and then the other comment, I guess, is if we are starting to add a discussion on the measurement, people are going to ask about discount rates. So I'm not sure if we need to deal with it now, but I guess we need to think about what we would say if it comes up in the comment letters. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Lindy. Mike?
Thanks, Ian, and thanks, Joe. I suppose the conversation so far just makes me a bit worried when we are asked to sort of approve a definition or some text on the run. But that aside, I agree with Lindy's point about the use of the word actuary. So if you're going to change that, Joe, that helps me. Thanks. The other point I was going to make, though, is that AG 16 doesn't deal with hybrid schemes, and it's inconsistent throughout the document. Sometimes we do deal with hybrid schemes, sometimes we don't. And I think AG 16 just misses that out, and it needs to deal with it. And the same applies to AG 2. So I think if you're going to have AG 16, it just needs to have another bit talking about hybrid schemes, because defined benefit schemes can also be defined contribution schemes or have components thereof.
Thanks, Mike. I mean, my suggestion would be that we actually have a clear statement in scope that hybrid schemes are treated as defined benefit schemes, so that we don't have to keep repeating it, but it's absolutely clear. And then essentially you're talking about the two types, DB and DC. So I think if staff can take that away and make sure that we have that clear statement in one place, and it will be in the scope area. And as you mentioned, I think AG2, didn't you, Mike, or was it paragraph 2? That's the place that we make that statement, and then we don't need to make it again. Jo.
Yeah, paragraph 7 of the scope. Such hybrid plans are considered to be defined benefit plans for the purpose of this standard.
Right, okay.
So it is there.
Thanks, Jo. Todd.
Thanks, Ian. Just coming back on what you were saying about stating it once, that might deal with an issue that I came across as I was looking through the change to the definition of net assets available for benefits for defined benefit plans, where we actually add in the hybrid plan and link it to defined contributions, which I did get a bit stuck on as I was reading through that, because it seemed to be the first place that we were really starting to say that in a hybrid plan situation, you'll have both defined benefit obligations and defined contribution obligations, which started to get a little confusing for me, I think. So if we just maybe say it once up front, that could help with those sorts of issues.
Okay, thanks, Todd. I can understand that. I think I tripped over the similar thing, actually. So I think that would be the way through, that's a clear statement up front, and that would need to be made consistent throughout. Okay. So I think we've got a number of suggestions for finessing paragraph AG16. I hear support generally, though, from members for putting those AGs in, that's helpful. We have also, there's the specific points on the definitions and how that's approached, which Adrienne made. And then we have that third point in terms of consistency throughout, in terms of we deal with hybrid schemes as part of the scope. And then we can remove the other references, having included them within DB schemes right up front. Okay, so we have those three further points to work through in relation to that proposal. Okay, so Jo, move us on to the next issue.
So the next issue is a suggested change to AG, what was AG 19. I can't, sorry, I did put now, I'm not certain what the paragraph's going to be now. So I'm just trying to read it. So this again talks about, further strengthens what's required in the calculation of the actuarial present value of promised retirement benefits and what needs to be focused, the areas that need to be focused on. So I'll just leave that a little bit longer for board members to read.
Okay, so if you can take that down, Jo, and then we'll open up for any comments from board members on that clarification there. Adrienne.
Again, I like these clarifications, but it's a bit categoric to say and I've lost the text now, but in a defined benefit plan will have no actuarial link to the contributions. I can't remember exactly how it was put. That's a bit too categoric because of all the different kinds of hybrids. So you could have a defined benefit plan with some specified cap, even though it's a defined benefit plan. So it comes back to this general point that I think Glenn made earlier, that there are so many hybrids. Let's never be categoric. Just say is likely to, or usually doesn't, or the pure defined benefit plan doesn't. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Adrienne. Lynn.
When I saw the additional sentences added around the focus on assumptions, I just wondered if it was really needed in authoritative guidance. I don't absolutely feel strongly, but I just wondered if was it really needed in the authoritative part of the standard.
Perhaps staff could clarify where this the suggestion for this originated from.
David, did you want to take that?
Well, this was in discussion with the chair. I mean, that's where it originated from.
Mm.
So, I mean, it's a question of, I mean, whether or not people think that it actually adds some information to the AGs. So Mike's got his hand up.
It answers the point that Renee raised earlier, I think. But
Well, it does do that.
If members don't like it, then I mean, it was intended to help rather than if it's causing a problem, then we don't have to have it. But Mike, I'm going to take a comment from you.
Yeah, thanks. And I suppose I'm on Lynn's side. I was trying to work out why we were adding this text, and it's getting into a level of detail I'm not sure we need. I mean, actually, do a whole bunch of things, and they do some things I don't understand at all, and some things I do. And I just wondered whether we want to give them this level of detail in a standard that may change as we know. David's schemes are different. Yeah, I think we're getting into too much detail.
Okay, Scott.
Yeah, not to pile on, but I would agree with the two previous. We got to caution ourselves about actuarial. It's not our forte. So we're talking about what would be included, and that may be true. It may not be true. So I think it may be a little too far.
Okay, so we leave AG 19 as was. Okay, Joe, move us on to the next one.
So the next one is some suggested revised text for what was AG 26 to AG 29. So we understand that these paragraphs were causing some issues where we were being quite specific about where contributions would be recognised, which statement of changes they would be recognised in, whether it was going to be a statement of changes in net assets available for benefits or a statement of changes in member obligations. So we've softened the language, we've made it a bit, I'm going to use the term woolly, and just say that, that depending on the judgment of the preparers about whether contributions and benefits are revenue and expenses or liabilities and reduction in liabilities, that you might want to consider where those line items are going to be shown and not actually specify which statement to put them in.
Okay,
so this would
give members a little bit more time to read what's proposed. Okay, so Joe, if you can take that down, and then we'll take comments from members on that. Todd.
And just as I was reading through what was on the screen, we talked about contributions being liabilities, I think, in the first or second sentence of the second paragraph that was there, but we then didn't go on to say that the benefits might be reducing that liability. I just wondered whether that helps, because I think we started off talking about both contributions and benefits, and then we just talked about contributions and about that second sentence of the second paragraph.
Thanks, Todd. So I saw nods as you were making that point, so staff can address that.
Yep.
Adrienne.
I guess I should say that I'm not sure I understand the point of the end of the last of what the last sentence actually means. What the paragraph says is there's a mess out there in terms of how things are treated. They're all treated differently, in different systems, with very little systemization of it. But what is so I think it is helpful to say that, even though it's a pity that the standard can't kind of impose a better structure for everybody. But what does the last sentence actually tell people to do? Because I can't see it, I can't refer to it, but I wasn't clear on it. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrienne. Back to you, Joe.
Okay, so the last, sorry.
Do you want to put that back up again,
yeah,
Joe, just so we can see it, and then you can talk us through it?
Yeah, so the last line item, this last sentence is that just depending on the circumstances, that depending on whether you're treating them as revenue and expenses or whether you're treating them as liabilities, it just you may show them differently in different places on the statement of changes in retirement benefits. They may be, so if you were considering this as a liability, you may actually show those as singular line items. If you were showing them as part of a revenue, they might be combined with other figures. It's just, we've looked at a variety of retirement benefit plans financial statements and trying to reverse engineer them and see how they've worked. And as I said, they are all different. So we're just trying to open the door for preparers just to consider about how they would like to present these line items. And obviously it's going to depend on what they think is important information for their preparer, for their users as well.
So Joe, just a clarification then. So does this then link in with the fact that we've got the different implementation examples?
Yes, it does. Yes, so the implementation examples will illustrate this. That's the point.
So sort of thinking about Adrienne's point there, actually, it may be helpful then to cross-reference into that, just to make that clear that that's where you would look for guidance depending on the circumstances of your scheme. Okay. And then over to Patricia.
Thank you. I think this change is appropriate because of the problem that I have raised about the net assets, statement of changing net assets available for benefits, because the decision if how treat the revenues contributions and benefits doesn't impact on net assets available for benefits. But I have a question here. The AG 29 be deleted? I think.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
So AGs 26 to 29, as they are in what I sent out on Friday, will be replaced by these two paragraphs.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that clarification, and also thanks, Patricia. I know you've worked offline with staff on helping with the implementation examples. Okay, so I'm seeing support for those revised paragraphs, 2 AGs instead of the original ones, subject to that cross-reference into the examples to make the link clear. Okay, so then if we can go to the next issue, Jo.
Yeah, so I don't actually have a slide on this. So the next issue was on the transition. So we had proposed prospective application, and board questioned why it wasn't retrospective. So we took that away and we thought about it. We thought if you're doing retrospective transition, then you're going to need 3 years worth of information to actually prepare your first set of financial statements. And we thought about the purpose of this project is to get the information about the obligation out there into, for users to see what a government's obligation might be for their employees' pensions. So we thought with prospective application, you only need 2 years. So if you have prospective application, we could have a 2-year application date, whereas if you had retrospective, we would probably have to have a 3-year application date. And we thought with the importance of the information that we would want to get it out there further, quicker. So that's why we still support going for the prospective application.
And just to underline, that would mean you would have an opening balance sheet and a closing balance sheet in your financial statements.
Yeah.
Okay. So open up for comments from members on any concerns over the position put forward by staff. Yeah, Lindy.
I mean, I think we can see what people say, but I think if you have 2 years, you're going to have a closing balance, but you probably would still need an opening balance for that. But yeah, it depends on what you want in the detailed disclosures. But I mean, I think if you give them enough lead time, they should be able to give you the information. But let's see what if people raise it during the comment process.
Okay. Mike.
Yeah, I'm just thinking out loud here. I mean, is this something we ever raised as an SMC? Is it worth putting it in there so we make sure we get feedback?
That was certainly where my thought was going, Mike, actually. I mean, what I'm, okay, Todd, I mean, just what I'm sensing is members would be okay to put in prospective as you're proposing, with appropriate supporting, making sure that the discussion is appropriate with that addition of an SMC specifically so that we test that. Todd, to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. And I'm just reflecting on the comment that Lindy made, and just wondering out loud again, is going with prospective and asking an SMC, does it make it a bit more difficult for us to then move to retrospective, because that's probably a bit more onerous if we did make that change, than going out in the exposure draft with retrospective, asking the SMC and moving to prospective. So it was just a thought based on what Lindy had said, and maybe staff can come back on that.
Thanks, Todd. That's a good point. Ross, can we go to you on that?
Yeah, I don't think it really complicates anything, to be honest. I think the board's putting its thinking on what it proposes in the ED and what it should do. And I think there's a clear rationale to get people using this standard quicker, to offer perspective. And there'll be an SMC, so we'll definitely get feedback on people agree or not. If they tell us they think it should be retrospective and give us good reasons, we change our mind, then we just amend it in the final standard. I don't, it's not a hidden issue. Everyone will be able to comment on it. So I think the board needs to decide what it wants to do. Either prospective as proposed or retrospective.
Okay, Ross, thanks for that clarification. I mean, I think you raised a good point there, Todd, but on the basis that it's the SMC, if we then respond to constituents saying, no, it must be retrospective, what you're saying, Ross, is that would be okay. So I think that still allows us to respond in that way to any strong feedback we get on that. Okay, so is everyone content then with that as the way forward on that issue? Lindy.
Yeah, sorry, not to be a pain in the board. I think if we look at if we propose that way, if we look at the requirements in paragraph for the statement of changes in net assets, you need an opening and closing balances. So you would have to, if we say prospective, you would need some sort of, that you don't need that for the 1 year. Anyway, but maybe I should speak to Jan about it, because I was just wondering if we're not asking for that in any case in the standard as it is, to have 3 years.
Yeah. Joe or David, any immediate thoughts on Lindy's point there?
Well, I mean, obviously the statement of financial position that we would have opening and closing, I didn't see that the statement of changes in net assets, well, most of those figures would come from that statement anyway, so we might need to think about whether we had to do that. But I mean, I think the point really is what are the figures that users of the financial statements are going to be interested in, and we've discussed this in task force, and we've talked about it in the board as well. And really, I think there are two figures that anybody with any sense is going to be interested in. One is the total obligation for future pension payments. And the other is where the scheme is not funded by a nice little fat investment pot, what is the deficit that is going to fall on future generations? And those are the two figures that are going to be of interest. If you do a prospective application, you've got those figures in the statement of financial position. And so that's really the reason why we felt that those are the figures people are going to focus on. So let's get those out there. I mean, yes, you could go retrospective and then you would get some additional information, but some of that information will probably take a bit longer to get hold of. But that's really the reason why we went for prospective, because of those key figures which are on the statement of financial position. I don't know whether that helps.
So David, I think what I'm hearing is members are content that we put the proposal out there. I think what we need the instruction would be that we would need that to be worked through to make sure that, the implications of that are stated clearly, in terms of, therefore there would be no need for comparatives or whatever the implication is. But, I mean, I'm sensing that if it essentially allows us to get, as you've suggested, those key figures out, and, essentially, probably earlier, that would, members would support that. Okay, with that, Lindy, that we ask staff and task, to go through and do that, that providing that works out okay, then we're content with prospective. Okay. So Joe, anything else that you want to bring up by way of proposed substantive issues for discussion today?
No, they're all the substantive issues that I've got. As I said, a thank you to the board members who provided me with comments and edits, and we'll be working through those in January. And yeah, depending on which way we take with this vote, we'll see whether we're coming back in February but you'll see a revised version anyway.
Okay, so I think we then as a board need to decide how we see the way forward. And at the start of the session, I outlined 3 possible options that we had in due process terms. Listening to the discussion that we've had thus far today, it does feel to me that we should take straight approval off the agenda as an option. It feels to me like we are close, but there is still, a number of things that just need to be finally worked through. And therefore, I think probably the choice is between whether we approve subject to the items that we've discussed today and anything else that comes to light during the sort of editorial process, or we leave approval until February. So I'm interested then in terms of members' views on whether they would be willing to vote subject to, as we did with measurement last year, and what that would mean would be clear on the subject twos, and those would need to be specifically addressed. If we go that route, you would get an opportunity to review out of session around about the end of January, and then we would bring the final version back together with any substantive issues for discussion raised through that process at the February check-in. So that would be the process, as opposed to we could just leave all of this to get worked through and then come back and vote in February. So I would just like to take views from members on that, whether they're content to go with a subject to approval now. Yeah, Mike.
Thanks, Chair. So yeah, a bit like you, I'm sort of twisting and turning which way to go, but I'm just reflecting that by the time you get to February, you're going to have 4 new board members, and the 4 of us that have been involved that are leaving now will have been, have had a lot to say about what this is going to look like. So I think we should go for the subject to approval today. Otherwise, I think it's just going to be too hard for new members.
Okay, thanks, Mike. And I see support for that view. Scott.
Yes, I could take my hand back down with Mike. So I agree with Mike. I think it just keeps the process moving, and I think that's important. So I would suggest subject to. Okay. So I've heard 2 comments in favour of subject to and thumbs up from various members. Is anybody not content to take that approach now? Okay, so I think with that, we will move forward to approval subject to. I think we had, sorry, Patricia.
I agree with the approach, but I think I have one more, I think it's substantial question that I present. It's about the SMC. One moment, please. Check here. It's about SMC 6. The question about how to treat the obligation for defined contribution obligation. In my view, IS 26 does not specify where the retirement benefit obligation for defined contribution plans should be present, because requirements about the statement of financial position for defined contribution plans do not exist in IAS 26. So I think the first question should be if the respondents agree with the inclusion of the statement of financial position for defined contribution plans, and then if the respondents agree with the proposals that define contribution obligation should also be present on the face of the financial position. It's my other questions is I think it's possible to address in the editorial process, but I think in this case it is a deviation from IAS 26. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Patricia, for bringing our attention to that. Joe or David, any reactions to that?
Well, IAS 26 is not very clear about what it does and doesn't require, so I'd have to revisit I know it does state that there are certain things that IAS 26 does have to provide for defined contribution plans, but what we have done is tried to make this consistent for both types of plans. So obviously with a defined benefit plan, you want to see that obligation. So there's no reason why with a defined contribution plan, you wouldn't want to see that obligation as well. As I said, I'd have to go back through IAS 26 again and see what it does say for defined contribution plans and see whether it was a departure, whether this is an addition to IAS 26. And then if it is, that is something that I could make that as an instruction to review that and bring it back in.
So Joe, I'm sensing that we're going to get a whole host of members coming in on this. I would rather not re-deliberate on this at this stage. What I would rather do is make approval subject to resolution of the drafting around that point in the document, and then that the SMC clearly expresses it. Okay. So that is one of the subject twos.
Yep.
Renee, are you on that point or are you on something else?
I am on that point, and I was hoping I could help. Chair,
Renee, sorry, I don't want to get into an agreement process on that at this stage. I'd rather just that we have that as a subject too, because I think it is a matter of fact and it does need clarification. I think Patricia's right on that because it is an important point. So if we can take that offline, but we need to resolve that, that's one of the subject twos. Okay, so in terms of the subject twos, we have that SMC point that needs resolving. We have the 3 points that were raised around that revised AG, I think it was AG 16, wasn't it? We're not proceeding with AG, the proposed change to AG 19. We have the insertion of the additional paragraphs 26 and 27. And then we have the changes consequent on the decision that we would go for prospective adoption with an SMC on that. Does that capture the subject twos then? Okay. So with that, Ross, perhaps you can take us into the vote on the exposure draft.
Yeah, thanks, Ian, and thanks to the board members for this. So the vote is subject to the items that Ian's just listed. The approved ED subject to those items will be brought back to the board at the February check-in to clear those subject twos. Same process we followed last year. And now on that vote, it's the same as a regular vote. So first, I'm going to ask all members who agree to approve this subject to raise their virtual hands. And I'm going to count all the votes. So I count 15 hands raised 16 hands raised. So we have 16 votes for. Can take them down, I think. Yep, take them down. Now, anyone who wants to vote against, please raise your hand. I'm seeing no votes against. And anybody who wants to abstain? And I'm seeing no abstentions. So we have one absent, Hervé Adrienne, and I noted 16 votes for. And I'm not seeing Chris on screen. I know Chris has been having issues with his internet the last couple of days, so I'm assuming the missing vote is Chris. I'm just going to give Chris an opportunity. Chris, are you online? Yeah, we don't have Chris online.
Okay. So I think in process terms, probably we have to record Chris as absent for that vote.
Yes, I've noted Chris is absent for the vote.
Okay, so we have 16 in favour and 2 absent.
Great, thank you.
Okay, good. Well, thanks everyone. I think as Mike put it very well, the reasons why we wanted to go for approval subject to. So I think obviously, Joe, we're mindful of the transitional issues you're going to face in returning to Australia. So David has very kindly agreed to lead on making sure that those changes that the board has requested, both in terms of the subject twos and the drafting changes, that those get put through ready for recirculation. So David, could you just, so I think we're looking at a sort of out of session circulation so that people can have an initial look at that with then a formal review of the subject to a formal final review in February. Yep.
Yeah, that's fine. And while you're allowing me to speak, could I just thank the one person who's attending this meeting, but already having sent through an example of a public sector retirement benefit plan account. So thank you very much, Claudia.
Yeah, thanks very much. It does really help seeing those practical examples to make sure we've got the implementation examples worked through. Mike.
Thanks, Chair. I don't want to prolong the discussion, but I presume, David, that the task force will continue to operate, or are we forming a separate editorial group?
Well, eventually there will be a separate editorial group. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'd like to be on that, please. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's fine. As ever, we're looking for volunteers, so gratefully accepted, Mike. Okay, so I think with that brings us to the conclusion of that first session on approval of pronouncements and exposure drafts. So thanks everyone for bearing with us as we just work through those various different issues. Ross, I think that moves us on then to your update based on what we've achieved in the meeting. And I think I would just like to record the fact I think we have achieved a lot in this meeting.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. And I'm just pulling up my my slides here, and I only have one slide, but just following from Ian, I do think it's been a pretty productive year for the board considering the circumstances we're working under. And from the staff, I'd also like to thank members, TAs, observers, and all the volunteers for the dedication and working through the virtual meetings and, you know, supporting with all the discussions outside of meetings. I think that's really helped the staff keep things moving, and we're grateful for your contributions. So, you know, at the end of this meeting, at the beginning of this meeting with 4 approvals on the agenda, I can tell you from a staff perspective, we knew it was going to be a tough meeting. We worked hard to get things ready, but I think it is quite an achievement that we have 3 full approvals and 1 approval subject to, all while working virtually. So that makes the updates a little easier than they could have been today. So I did want to make that comment up front before I flip to the actual changes to the work program that I'll be reflecting following this meeting after I get board agreement. And then one item I wanted to flag that we'll work on in Q1 2022. So the first item, as I foreshadowed in my report posted about a month ago now, is based on progress. We are going to have to update the timelines on both revenue and transfer expenses. So my proposal to the board at this time is that we put back those timelines by 1 quarter. So the current work program shows June 2022 as the approval date. And I think at this point, we're not going to hit that. Even with some good progress on revenue in particular at this meeting, I think it's more realistic to push that back to September 2022 at this time. So that's my first proposal, and that we continue to monitor progress on that project at each meeting. So we'll have another discussion in March 2022 based on progress and what we want to do at that point. Another item that I think I would suggest we add to the work program on that is a note on re-exposure. Now, I don't want to indicate that re-exposure is imminent, but I think at this point, it is highly likely we'll have to re-expose both transfer expenses and revenue. In due process, that decision comes after the board actually approves the pronouncement itself. If there's a substantive change from what was exposed, I think we're in the place at the moment now where both transfer expenses and revenue will be substantively different from what was proposed. And I think it would be helpful to signal that to constituents that it's likely that re-exposure will have to occur, and that we include that on the timeline for the project so that people are aware. So if with that, there's 2 proposals there I'd like to hear from the board on. First, to push back the timelines by 1 quarter, and 1 to add a re-exposure note. But I'll take down the slide so that members who want to comment, we can actually see who's got their hands up. Is that okay?
Okay. Thanks, Ross. And perhaps in terms of communicating that, we might style that a working assumption in terms of re-exposure, given that formal due process, that decision won't be taken until later. Any comments on that? Okay, I see thumbs up to that. That's helpful. So thanks for those confirmations. So Ross, take us back into your report.
Yeah, and thanks members for that confirmation. I'll reflect those changes on the next version of the work program. The other item I have on here is just retirement benefit plans. Not knowing before today where we were going to end up. The one thing that is certain that because it's not a clear approval and we will be bringing it back to the February 2022 check-in, the current timelines will need to be pushed back 1 quarter. So I think that's a logical decision based on where the board's landed today and where we are on that approval. And I'd like to reflect that. So just wanted to give members a chance to comment on that. Thank you.
We're content with that reflection of where we've got to in the meeting. Okay, seeing support for that. Okay, so take us back into the item.
Thanks, everybody. And the other point on here won't be reflected in the report that I'll finalize after this meeting, but in Q1 2022, there is a need now that we're moving into 2022 that we add the work program extended out through 2024. So my proposal is that I work on that in the new year, start extending all the timelines out on projects so we can see how they'll outturn through 2024. So we can start communicating that from March 2022 after the board's had a look at it. I just wanted to flag that that's a piece of work that will happen and see if board members had any comments or thoughts on that. Thank you.
And that's clearly subject to the finalisation of the feedback on the work programme consultation. But members indicated they were content to move forward with the proposals we exposed, obviously with the addition of or potential addition of limited scope projects related to sustainability. Okay. Lucy.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is not actually a question, but rather a suggestion. Since the work plan would be extended to 2024, so that means this will already be covered by the new strategic plan, strategy plan for 2024 to 5, 6, 7, 8, 2028. So I understand it right? Because if it is extending to 2024, then it is no longer covered by the present strategy 2019 to 2023. Thank you.
Ross, back on that.
Yeah, Lucy, that's a good point. And part of the extension of the timeline will be thinking about the process to develop the next strategy and what we do there. But I think it's, regardless of whether the strategic period at the moment currently goes to 2024, the projects definitely will go to 2024. And in fact, most of the projects we were discussing today started in the 2015 strategy period. So I think once they become active projects, they're initiatives we're working on until we decide to stop them or finish them. So I think, maybe we'll make a note regarding the current strategic period and what it covers. But regardless of that, I think the projects themselves will continue and need to be completed regardless of what we choose to do in strategy. But that's a good point I'll think about how to reflect that and give board members a chance to comment in March on the updated plan.
Thanks, Ross. And certainly, if you look at any of the presentations that the new IASB chair, Andreas Barkau, has made recently, because obviously they've been looking at the outturn of their agenda consultation, he's very much reflected that up front, that there are committed projects already from previous consultations, which will continue. So as you say, Ross, we need to work out just how we present that in the update. Okay. Ross, any other points you want to raise at all at this stage?
No, Ian, no other points that I wanted to clear with the board today related to updating the work program or thoughts on that for Q1. And just to thank you from me and the staff for the members' hard work this year. Again, it's been a tough year, but we couldn't do what we do without the volunteers and the board members involved in our process. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Ross. So I'd very much personally like to endorse what you said. I think we have had a tremendous amount of support and input both during this meeting and during the rest of the year, and it remains tough to work virtually. So I would like to really recognise all the support that we've had. I know staff have produced an excellent set of papers for us at this meeting, but I think huge thank you to you, the board members, technical advisors, observers. Also, I think, when you reflect on the degree of, response that we've had from our stakeholders as well, both through formal responses, all those responses we had on measurement, as well as the input to the roundtables, that's been absolutely excellent, and I think it's really fantastic the way our stakeholders have stayed with us on the course. So thank you, everyone. Obviously, we did thank our 4 departing members on Friday, Adrienne, Bernard, Mark and Mike, and also their TAs as well, Jakob and Clark, who won't be returning. Also Claudia, who we will welcome as a new board member in January. There was one person though that who will be departing as a TA that we didn't thank, and
sorry, Ian, we lost you that last.
Okay, so hopefully you heard my thanks to the TAs departing, Jakob and Clark, and welcoming Claudia as a new member. And just to say, there's one TA who is leaving that we hadn't recognised there, and Lindy just wanted to say a word on that.
Thank you very much. And it is with a lot of sadness that I need to say goodbye to my wing woman, Solo, he's leaving us and me. It is her last meeting. And just thought to say thank you very much for your contribution, Solo, during the meetings. Oh, I don't know why I'm so emotional, sorry. It's all the projects we approved. During the meetings via my phone and directly to staff and to the board. Thank you so much. You've not only made a contribution locally to standard setting, but certainly internationally, and wishing you all the best. You can put your camera on so we can wave. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much to everyone. Yeah. Yeah, you just caught me off guard there, Lindy, and to the chair, but yeah, it has really been great to be being part of this board, and I'm hopeful that I will return. I just don't know when, but thank you very much to all the board members and to the TAs and to staff of the IPSASB.
Okay, so thank you for that, and so very much an au revoir and all the best in the interim till we hopefully see you again. And I think with that, that brings us to the conclusion of the formal board meeting. You know, it has been a marathon in terms of going through all our active projects at the moment. So thank you everyone for keeping up with that. Thank you to the staff and for supporting us in that. Really, in closing the meeting, I think it just remains to wish you all you know, hopefully a relaxed and healthy festive season, and hopefully see those of you returning again early next year. I think with that closes the formal part of the board meeting. Obviously, members, your